record the session and start recording. And as new students come in, I'll just stop for a brief moment and ensure that everyone feels comfortable with the recording. So thank you so much for attending this panel that is hosted by Tour for Diversity. My name is Jerome Arsenault, and I'm going to be your moderator for this panel. I am a 7th year MD PhD student at Meharry Medical College, and I am interested in pursuing neurosurgery. Not only that, but I have the pleasure to serve as the National Vice President for the Student National Medical Association. And so my pronouns are he, him, his. And like I stated, this is a safe space, and we have 2 physicians with us that are going to be your panelists. And if you each would like to introduce yourself, state your pronouns as well as your specialty.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. My name is Dr. Otano, but everybody calls me Victoria. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am an open LGBT physician. I belong to the lesbian community, but the LGBTQ. And I'm very happy to be sharing this with you today and about my experiences. So I wish I had somebody to tell me certain things about their experiences. So feel free to ask any questions that you want, and we're here to help.
And Dr. Otano, which specialty, which medical specialty?
I'm a family medicine physician.
And I'm Michael. I am an OBGYN. I use he, him, his pronouns. And I am married, and I was married during kind of the residency application process and also fellowship process. I'm now a fellow at the University of Colorado.
Fantastic. And I will just give a moment to see if Ayala would like to introduce themselves. If you're more than welcome to turn on your mic and or your video, and you can introduce yourself, tell us your pronouns, as well as your specialty of interest. If you do not feel comfortable doing that, that is okay, and we can go ahead and continue, but just want to give you that opportunity.
Thank you so much. My name is Ayala Hurtado. My pronouns are he, him, and él. Sometimes when I'm doing transgender rights organizing, I also use she pronouns. My interest right now, I'm an M3, and I'm interested in psychiatry, in particular child psych, working with trans communities of color and how it relates with their family members.
Thank you so much, Ayala, for that introduction, as well as for letting us know your interest. And so to go ahead and get this panel started, I have one question, and I think some of you have already sort of honed in on it, but just want to know, when you were applying to residency and or fellowship, were you open throughout the application process? And Dr. Belmonte, you can go first if you feel comfortable.
Sure. Yeah, so my now husband and I have been together kind of throughout most of my higher education experience. And so I felt like it was super important for me to be kind of completely myself and out during the process. So that held true for medical school, residency, and fellowship. I think it was important for me to end up at an institution where I felt like I was not only supported as kind of a learner and a physician, but also as a person. And so I think if you feel comfortable doing that in that process, it's nice to know that you'll end up at a place where you feel like you fit in.
Dr. Otano?
Yes, I'm on the same boat that Michael was. So I was engaged at the time when I was applying for residency. So it was important to me to bring my wife-to-be to, I was lucky enough that Kansas City has a national conference for family medicine in town. That's where I was doing medical school. So I brought her along to meet some of the schools, some of the programs that were kind of promoting their programs, and I was very open about it. And even during that little process of deciding where to apply, just by taking her with me and noticing how maybe some programs were very uncomfortable, some residents were very uncomfortable just talking to us, was very easy for me to realize that I didn't even want to apply to that program, not even interview. So to me, it was also important to end up in a place that I was going to be supported, and also that my wife was going to be a part of the community as well, because it was going to be a new place, a new city most likely, and it was important that we felt part of the residency family and not segregated or uncomfortable. So I was open from the very beginning of my process.
Thank you so much. And then along those lines, you both mentioned the fact that you were open and there were certain things that you looked at with, I'm assuming, on the application trail as well as the interview trail. Do you both mind speaking on what some of those things were? Dr. Atano, you mentioned that you brought your wife to be with you and ensured that any conversations that you had, that she was present, and you sort of gauged individuals' reaction. Can you expand on that as well as give some additional things? And then Dr. Belmonte, the same to you. What are some of the strategies you use to really gauge how individual residency programs would be surrounding who you are?
Definitely. And I'm also Hispanic, so I have a double edge. So I was looking for diversity overall in all my places that I was going to end up at, or potentially end up. So diversity was pretty big. So I would look on their website if they had a statement of diversity. I would look at the grid of the residents and see, do I feel myself represented in there? And by being LGBT is different and is a little more difficult because you can't tell this person's gay, this person's not, this person. So I was looking also for a place of diversity in colors of skin. I wasn't going to be the only one that was different. So that was important to me. And I will always ask very openly, tell me about your diversity on your program, tell me about your faculty, tell me about, and I will wait. If I wasn't with my wife, I'll kind of wait and see what they ask. And then I'll openly ask, okay, tell me about your LGBT population. And I had the opportunity again before I apply to gauge some of these reactions, which was very beneficial. And I was able to cross programs off my list that, maybe it was a great location, maybe it was a great experience, but I already knew because the residents were uncomfortable, or they will just looking at me like, what do you mean? What are you asking me about diversity? And they will just, completely ignore her, even though she was standing right next to me, ignore her questions that she'll have. Well, what do spouses do in their free time, or what are job opportunities for spouses? And that was very easy for me to cross them off my list. If you're single, I think, it's also a different decision that you have to make, whether you want to be open or not, because it might not be, you're not bringing anybody along. You might have different interests. You might want to protect your identity in a sense. So I think it's a little bit different. For me, it was very important that my wife at the time felt that she was part of the process, and that she was part, we both gonna end up being in a place that was very comfortable for us.
Yeah, I completely agree with all of that. I think now with kind of everything on the internet, you can look at programs' websites. A lot of programs will have Instagrams and kind of Twitter and all of these things, and you can see kind of what the focus of their program is. And you can also see kind of the residents at work and then kind of outside of work, and kind of get a sense of that program in general. And then I think the next step is really kind of that interview process, and really take advantage of those kind of, if they have like a DEI get together, or if they have the night before your interview, one of those kind of get to know yous, it can be really enlightening to see people kind of in that different atmosphere, and just have open and honest conversations about what's kind of important to you and what makes you you. And then I think in the interview process, agreed, kind of asking about the things that are important to you and that will kind of make you a good kind of fit in that program. Like, do they have any trans population to take care of, or is that not something that you're going to learn in that residency? And then maybe that's not a good fit just in and of itself. And so kind of taking into all of that into consideration can really make a big difference. And then I agree, I recognize that the process is going to be a little different now, given that the pandemic has made a lot of these things virtual. But even through my virtual interviews for fellowship, I would make sure that my husband popped onto screen and said hello to everyone so that they knew that he was there. And I would specifically ask, like, my husband and I are moving from a place where we have our friends and our support system to somewhere completely new. And do you feel like you guys can be that support system for us? And I ended up at a program where I felt like everyone wanted to kind of support me in my journey in my career, but also get to know my husband, which was important to me.
Jerome, you're on mute.
Oh, I knew it was going to happen once. Thank you so much. So thank you both so much for sharing your experiences. Just wanted to welcome Dr. Green. Thank you so much for joining us. Dr. Green, want to let you know that this is being recorded. If you feel uncomfortable to have these discussions, we can stop the recording. So just want to know if you would like us to stop the recording or continue.
No, thank you for having me. Sorry, just finishing up. I'm okay with continuing.
Okay, fantastic. And just so you are aware, I've just asked, if individuals decide would introduce themselves, their pronouns, as well as their specialty of choice, and then we'll go from there.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Sorry I'm late. My name is Maya. I'm a physician in Chicago at an organization called Howard Brown Health that focuses on service to people of the LGBTQ community and Two-Spirit community. My pronouns, I use anything respectful. It is good for me. And then you saw that smile. I see your smile, Jerome. I use anything respectful. And I started as an HIV specialist, but really people living with HIV heavily come from communities that are impacted with by HIV and other, because they're impacted by social determinants of health. So really my hat is in kind of equity medicine, which hasn't been coined yet and is not a specialty yet, but it should be. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Dr. Green. And so just want to give you a brief moment to share your story. So the two questions that I've asked thus far are, one, throughout residency and or fellowship, if that applies to you, were you an open or authentic applicant? And then not only that, while you were on those respective trails, what were some of the things that you used to really gauge whether a program and or a fellowship would be comfortable with who you are and support who you are?
Well, open and I think so throughout. And definitely, well, medical school, I think I was still on my kind of inner journey. And I'm one of those people who I appear to be an extrovert, but I'm actually an introvert, and so I was still in that space. So I can't say what I was authentic. What that looked like, I don't quite know. Residency, definitely. I went to residency at University of Miami, which I did ask those questions that the doctor before me, the OBGYN before me, sorry, I didn't catch your name, did ask. So I can be in a place that was where I can kind of be all of me. For me, yes, but also for patients and people coming up so they can see that you can present authentically as you and still be, good at what you do and still be an excellent doctor. I think, it's part of my equity, trying to do away and dispel that concept that you have to conform to what I call 1776 syndrome. And I'll get into that later in order to do well in medicine. And then for my fellowship in HIV medicine at Rush, I chose a group that I did an HIV medicine fellowship through the Infectious Disease Society of America. And so I chose a group that included a lot of people of the LGBTQ and Two-Spirit community, thinking that that would equal a safe space, and which is where also some of the, and sometimes it was, sometimes it wasn't, because 1776 syndrome, which came into place there. And then now, from there, I went on to, after my fellowship, I just kept continuing to work at Core Center, which is an HIV specialty clinic mixture between Rush University and the county system, and then came over to Howard Brown. So I did ask those questions, because one of the profiles that I have is I'm not easy, pronouns kind of all over the place is not something that's necessarily triggering for me. So it didn't bother me. I think that is kind of why heavily I moved into different spaces, knowing certainly that is something that needs to be protected and acknowledged for everyone. Everybody doesn't have the same story. So. Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much. And so then just coming off of that, we have discussed thus far, applying as an open applicant if you identify as LGBTQ+. And then not only that, but asking certain questions to gauge whether a program would be accepting and supporting of you. But in your own personal experience, do you feel that some of the questions that you asked and the responses that you received, do you feel like they were genuine? And not only that, but without naming obviously specific programs, but are there some of the things that you noticed that people definitely, or I should say program directors or other residents said, and they sounded great, but then as you reflected upon them, they sounded more, for lack of a better phrase, cookie cutter?
Yeah. That disclaimer, like, we do not discriminate against gender identity and sexual orientation, that one that they just kind of spit out, that's very cookie cutter. One of the things I found helpful, I asked questions, but also the most helpful tool that I found to look into residencies, fellowships, places of work, medical schools, is often I can have a better idea of what's a safe space when I see their executive leadership. So if I'm applying for a residency, I'll go and look at the faculty. If I'm looking and it's hard because now you're kind of gauging with your eyes, but then of course now the faculty have all these other tools at our disposal. They have their faculty bios, they have their Facebook, they have so you would kind of look there. And if I'm seeing a diversity with respect to race, ethnicity, orientation, sexual orientation, gender identity at the executive level of the organization, then that gives me a better picture of what it may be like for people at all levels of the organization. So for me, one of the tools I use is I'll ask the questions, but I also do my own looking into who's at all levels of the organization.
I think it's also interesting. We all probably have somewhat similar stories in that at some point in our life, we were kind of hiding who we were, and we were very careful about the words that we chose when we were talking. And so I think in some respects, we tend to be better at being able to suss out when other people are trying to say the right thing as opposed to being genuine about it. And so a lot of what I felt along the interview trails was kind of just this gut feeling of you're just saying that to say that, as opposed to actually meaning it and being able to provide kind of concrete examples of what you're doing on a day-to-day basis, as opposed to maybe an example of something you did 5 years ago and you haven't really done anything since, or saying that you're working on it, but not saying how. That's certainly something that came up across the way.
Yes, and I agree with all those things. And then, for example, I had not put on my personal statement that I was openly gay, but I had no problems expressing that during the residency applications and interviews. However, that gave me, I feel, a little tool to sit back and see reaction of people when I will ask questions. And I found a couple of questions that I will ask every single interviewer at every single program and watch their responses. And like Dr. Green was saying, one of them is like, what is your patient population when it regards to LGBT? Because you don't have to be LGBT to be interested in LGBT health. So that will gave me, I feel like people were a little more sincere, and they will just start telling me, well, we really don't have that many here. And I'll be like, oh, why not? And I'll be like, kind of start telling certain things. And then I will transition into, what about your residencies, LGBT population? Are there any, would an LGBT resident feel comfortable here? And then I will kind of, gauge the situation. And sometimes I didn't even have to out myself to know I didn't want to be there. I do have a program, without saying names, that the program director itself told me, well, my chief resident was gay and I didn't even know until graduation. And he's like, if you kind of don't ask, don't tell. And I was like, so your chief resident that works very closely with you didn't feel comfortable enough to tell you. And they're like, oh yeah, and they have been together for years. That person didn't feel comfortable telling you who their partner was. So to me, that was a huge red flag, because I feel like the program director and even everybody, you spend so much time. So that was kind of very important to me. And I guess that just by asking, tell me about this, tell me about that, without even saying, well, if I come here with my wife, how would I feel? But you can ask that too. But what worked for me was that I didn't put anything explicitly on my personal statement. That gave me an opportunity to sit back and look at the residencies dinner, and then found a few questions I will ask across the board to every single interview and every single program. Because the program director might give you the cookie cutter because they want diversity in the program. But then you talk to the resident that's interviewing you and they will give you something different. So I think that's how important, kind of be consistent across when you're looking of where you want to go.
Okay, and then so that really sparked another train of thought. So in you all's opinion, do you think it's best to sort of, I don't want to say hide yourself, but to not out yourself in your personal statement and see the gut reaction that some of these interviewers may have? Or do you feel that it may be better to be open in your personal statement and then see how that influences how many interviews you get, if that makes sense?
I think, well, for me, I would not necessarily, I mean, everybody's different. So I wouldn't put it in my personal statement. And like, is it Dr. Otano? Like Dr. Otano said, I would choose whether or not I would move into having that discussion, or, the same way, just kind of all around things that we do with our, what is our business. So I'm a fan of not necessarily like, and it's not to hide it. And some people may feel like, hey, I want to say it here, say it there. I personally would not put that in my personal statement, because guess what? The people reading the first people reading the personal statement are not the people interviewing you. Your personal statement passes through many levels, and you don't want someone who couldn't give you a yes in the first place trying to give you a no because of some like messed up thing they have going on. So, I wouldn't. I would and did choose my residency based on the space where I would be safe. But that was my choice, not the recipient of the email in Eris. You know what I'm saying? So
Yeah, I think for me, especially applying into OBGYN, I didn't find a story to tell that related back to my identity specifically. And so certainly if you have that story to tell and you're passionate to tell it, and that's going to be the most personal thing you can kind of put forward, and you think that will kind of be something that people will connect with and latch onto, and you feel comfortable doing that, by all means. But for me, yeah, I agree. I did some things that were on my resume that if you really read through it, you'd be able to see those things. But it all depends on who's interviewing you. Some people will read every single piece of information you provide to them, and then other people won't know anything about you except your name and the picture next to it. And kind of the interview is that first time when they have the opportunity to kind of interrogate kind of who you are and what your goals are. So I think there are pros and cons of each way. And I think, like I said, if you have a good story to tell, it can be used to your advantage, but it doesn't have to be.
I agree with that. I always been very open about who I am, so I didn't feel the need to put it on my statement, but not because I wanted to hide it. It was just because, like Michael say, like it just didn't fit. There was not a story for me to tell that, but I did have a story to tell regarding working with underserved populations and what I wanted to work with in the future and how the LGBT community was part of that. And I was interested in working with them. So to me, that was more important than telling, well, I am gay and I'm gonna be a physician and how are you gonna help me? I used my interview process to gauge that. I also, by being Hispanic or a person of color, you don't want to end up in a place that are trying to recruit diversity because they have been cited of not having enough diversity. So I wanted to be chosen because of other qualities. And they already have my ethnicity and everything else out there. So I wanted to kind of make sure that wasn't like, oh, let me just interview, we need more gay residents, because I have heard that before. We need more Hispanics, we need more Blacks. Application to reflect who I was gonna become as a physician.
And within that same realm, talking about recruitment, because we do know that of late, there has been this push for us to increase equity, diversity, inclusion in whatever space that may be, whether it be according to sexual orientation, gender identity, or ethnicity and race. And so with that, in your current programs and in the past, did you struggle with feeling like, and I use this term colloquially, the only? So I see you, Dr. Green, do the exhaustive sigh. So would you like to start us?
Yep. So now I'll tell people about 1776 syndrome, which is not a coin. It's not, I just call it that. If we think back to what we know about 1776, people signing documents declaring our nation, independent, and we're going to do this, and we're this great place. There was one race, one gender, one orientation, one class. And for some reason, our nation, every 4 years, except for one, will vote in that one race, that one gender, that one stated orientation, that one class. We do it in the elections. We do it in the healthcare setting. We do it everywhere. And so that, from that time, our idea of what's professional kind of means how close can we come to that, right? So some of us, when we walk in, our skin already says, guess what? I'm not, I'm not that one race. Let's start there. Then it unfolds. I'm not that one gender. I'm not that one orientation. I'm not from that one class, and the other, the idea of the other happens for a lot of people, the further you get away from the standard that was developed in 1776. So yes, there's that feeling of the other, and There are programs that Dr. Matthews has, created to have a safe space, because I used to feel like, oh, I feel like the other. And I used to have a feeling of otherness until I developed engaged in a community of people. At the time we were in medical school, like Dr. Matthews and different people that were brilliant and vibrant and unapologetically who they were. And then I realized I didn't even really want to be like them. So now when I experience that feeling, it's like, oh, okay, I'm not like you. Yay me. Because not that you're bad, it's just that I love who I am. And I know there's a community and people continuously creating communities where I like to be, where my ideas thrive, where I'm inventive and creative in the craft that I do, which also plays back to my patients that need to see this nose, this skin, this hair, this orientation. For some people, when I walk in there and I have a little, and when they see me, they're like, oh, Dr. Green, on the street, and they see my partner, they're like, oh, because then they realize all those things, the 1776 syndrome that led up and coming people into our healers, into our profession, to believe that they couldn't do it. That's not actually true. So yes, there's a feeling of otherness. And I'm so glad there are communities and spaces and pioneers that are making ways, making roadways, and, for us to have a feeling of engagement in other spaces.
Dr. Otaño?
I feel I was one of the only Hispanics in my medical school. Absolutely, there was a feeling of I do not belong here. It was more of a race level to begin with, because there was very, very, very few minorities in my medical school class. And I'm not even talking about being out LGBT. This is just at the very base. So yes, definitely, I wasn't comfortable being who I was at the beginning. But in residency, because I made the effort to find a place that it was diverse enough, I felt that, yeah, I might have been the only LGBT person, but I wasn't the only person of color, and I wasn't the only person that was different. We have people from different religions. We have people of all different ages of life. We have people that had gone the traditional route of med school. We have people not. And everybody shared their world from where they're coming from. So I didn't feel alone, even though I was the only one representing my group. So I think that's important when you talk about diversity, that you feel like, everybody might have a different diversity. To me, was more important than just, is there anybody also in the community? And then once you're in, I think one of my biggest allies was one of my attendings, and she wasn't part of the community, but she was so passionate about LGBT health. And we worked together to do things to create a curriculum, to work with the residents, and having somebody higher up, like Dr. Green said, somebody, that's willing to help you and promote whatever it is that you're trying to do. It really made a difference for me, because she was a big ally of, we need to make changes, we need to help, And so for me, that was important. So yes, I did feel like the only one, but I felt so safe that it wasn't a problem that I was the only LGBT resident.
Yeah, I feel similarly in my experience. So I was born and raised in Chicago, and then I did medical school in Chicago. And my medical school class was actually extremely diverse. And so I appreciated that. And I never felt othered in that setting. But then I did residency in Indiana. And I mean, even before I applied, I told myself I would never, because I thought it was kind of the middle of nowhere cornfields, and I just would never be accepted there. And to my surprise, I was thrilled to match there because of how supportive they were of me as a person and all of the things that I want to do, just like everyone has mentioned kind of so far. And so did I still have that feeling of otherness? Yes, certainly at times. But the more important thing for me was kind of finding that group of people who would support me. And so I think if you are the type of person that doesn't like that feeling of otherness and needs kind of that huge diversity around you to feel comfortable, seek that out. And then if it's just kind of finding that support, then seek that out. It's really kind of a personal fit for you. I think even in kind of Indiana, even though my residency wasn't specifically that diverse, the university is large. And so I was able to build community kind of at the university level, and kind of look at it from a different lens, kind of Indianapolis being a big blue dot in a very red state. I also felt very comfortable there. So I think take a lot of those different avenues into perspective, and that can kind of help you find the place where you will feel most comfortable.
Great, thank you so much. And so then going along the lines of something that you mentioned, Dr. Atano, in terms of having an ally in leadership. I want to say, obviously, I'm not in that space right now, but please cross your fingers that I will end up there one day. How important, or first of all, let me ask, for each of your experiences, did you feel support more from your residency program or from your co-residents?
I felt from both, from everybody. I did make a point to bring my wife to every social event and make sure that she, mingle with the other spouses, and they will do it like spouse introduction dinner that was only them, and she was a part of all that. And thankfully my wife was very social, so that wasn't that hard to let her go fly on her own. So I did, and that from that part I found a great support from the residents, that she was really just one more. She was part of the fantasy football group, and we play softball, and it was just, there was no difference. From the faculty, they don't interact on my everyday outside of work kind of life. So for me, it was important of my everyday work. And, they will ask me about my wife and plans and stuff like that. But it was more important that I could find somebody that will help me push my goals to helping the LGBT community as a patient panel and kind of transform that. So being open was huge for my program because I was one of the first ones. And they used that as an avenue because I facilitated that too. We use it as an avenue together to, hey, everybody gets really along very well with you, your patients like you, your staff likes you. Let's use this as a positive way. So I did a lot of trainings with my staff, with the staff of everybody, and I would tell them my experiences. And I did trainings with the residents to talk about health disparities in the LGBT community and how I felt a certain way. And that really helped. But you need to have somebody, to me, it was important to have that faculty that was, especially when at the first year, when you're an intern, you're kind of trying to figure out your way around. So it's important. But my program, because it was very diverse, they were seeking and they wanted to improve and they wanted to teach and they wanted to do things. So that was important. For med school, I felt it was a little bit the opposite. Just even talking about Hispanic health was a huge controversy because I went to med school in Kansas. It was in the middle, again, like a very conservative state, and I was like, well, we need to talk about these things. And so I felt that all of that was not welcomed. It's like, yeah, this is great, but there's no time for that on the curriculum. This is great, but no now. So having somebody on that helps you, that's in attending or something is really important.
I would say I got different types of support. Definitely my colleagues in residency felt more supportive. I did my residency in University of Miami, and their idea is funny because their idea of support was anybody that came through the clinic, as you know, as like farm sales or physician assistant students, or any physician chiefs that were touring that were about my age that they assumed to be a member of the LGBTQ community. My attendings would be like, "Great, Maya, let's fix you up." I was like, "No, it doesn't work like it doesn't work." And that was that was their idea of support, you know. So I couldn't. I was like, "Yeah, thank you for that, but that's not how this works." You know, just anybody. They're like, "Great, we're your family. We're accepting you." See, you know. And I was like, "Oh yeah, okay," you know. So that was the support I got from, but also that was the support I got from the attendings and the faculty. The support I got from my colleagues was more like, "Oh, okay, so," which is for me, in line with my family. It's kind of like, "Oh, okay, well, that's going on. That's cool. All right, so are they coming to the picnic? What's going on? Okay, we like you said, are we gonna go over here and play the softball game or not?" It wasn't like a, "Wait a minute, you're coming out." It wasn't a big to do. It was like, "Oh, okay, right. So, you know, are you gonna pay for their ticket too?" You know, at the you know, and it was just so that feels to me feels like support, you know, when it just folds in you without disrespect.
Yeah, I mean, I had similar experiences, and I wanted a residency that felt like a family, and so I would say that obviously my cohort and even kind of the 4 years of residence were all very close, but our faculty wanted to be our family as well, and so it was always nice to know that you would go to X attending's house for Christmas if you were in town, or you would go to the pool party at the chair's house. And so if that's kind of the type of support that you need, then you have to seek that out. And if you are like, "I'm going to work to do the things that I'm passionate about for my career, but want to keep my kind of personal life separate," then that's another type of program. And so it's really important to kind of ask those pointed questions to make sure that you're getting what you want out of your experience, because residency is probably going to be the hardest however many years of your life, and you want to feel happy and supportive during that time.
Thank you.
Definitely. I'm just gonna piggyback right on that. I do think that it's gonna be a challenge this year because we do virtual interviews to kind of gauge that, and that has been taken away from applicants. That, hey, let's see how these people interact with each other, and you know, things like that. However, it also gives you the opportunity to, because you don't have to fly and pay for everything, you can apply to other places that you might know that are LGBT friendly. Like I'm in St. Petersburg now in my practice. There's people, and this is more open than I ever can imagine. You can look at places in San Francisco and in any big city, and you can look and figure out, and maybe before you were more restricted to apply. So there's give and take. You can apply anywhere in the country right now because you don't have to fly to go there. And just talking to people, see how people, you know, ask those questions. What you guys do on the weekends? What you guys do on things? What about holidays? And you get a feeling. You will get a feeling. People are very honest too. What I found is our residents last year, when we were, I just finished residency. So when we were interviewing, we also wanted people that was gonna fit with us. So we were very open at telling them, hey, you know, if you come here, we will expect you to be friendly, and we will want you to hang out with us. We will want, like, nobody wants that. In my program, nobody wanted somebody that will come, work, and leave, and that's it. And they were never a part of the family, never. There's people like that, of course, but you will have thrived better if your personality was more like, let's be part of a family, support each other, stuff like that. So you can kind of gauge those things by asking questions and just talking.
I think the other thing to keep in mind with the virtual season is, yes, programs are kind of able to hide their blemishes a little more and kind of get away with not showing you all of the things, but at the same time, you can use that to your advantage. You can kind of keep some things closer to the chest, and really anything outside of these 4 lines, you don't have to show if you don't want to.
Yes, thank you all so much. And so I'm going to ask one more question, and then Ayala, if you have any questions that I have not breached that you would like to ask, I welcome those. But just taking a step back and removing the identity aspect of applying to residency, if you all could think about one critical thing that really helped as you were applying to residency, what is it and why?
I think for me, the biggest thing that helped at the end of the day was really having an organized system to keep programs separated in your mind. Virtual interviewing all day long and going from one interview to the next, things tend to blur, and then you're left with kind of the gestalt of what you happen to remember. And so kind of keeping those meticulous notes and then like immediately filling in details like on an Excel sheet was important to me once the interview was over or between interviews. And then you had kind of more objective information to kind of ultimately make your decisions. Because there were times when the one thing that would like stick in my mind at the end of the interview season was not even that important. And so if you kind of ask similar questions, as has been like said before, throughout your process, and kind of be able to compare those answers one to one, I think it can help you find the place that's best for you a little easier.
I would say, can't think of one thing. The pro and cons list that Dr. Belmont mentioned, is it Belmont's? Yeah, Dr. Belmont mentioned. Okay. What was good because you can like literally keep it organized. The other thing that helped me was knowing that I was already a healer and being in alignment with my calling. So when I entered the room, I entered the room knowing what I was there for and not afraid to get it. So I didn't need to bend what I was going to say in favor of, like, we can have a conversation now because I know what I want. You know, same thing with the residency. I mean, the fellowship. You know, I was family medicine. They weren't at the time giving it to family medicine. It didn't matter. I knew what I wanted. I knew my path and I went to get it, you know? And so I think that helps me a lot. And then the other thing that helps me, not only in this instance, but when I interview for jobs, I always look at people's facial expressions when I'm done with whatever question or engagement of them. So if I'm talking to Dr. Belmont, as soon as I'm done talking about Dr. Belmont, I may initiate a conversation with Dr. Otano, but I'm still going to check back and see Dr. Belmont's face, you know, when Dr. Belmont feels like I'm not looking. For some reason, that helps me, you know, kind of read the room a little better.
Yeah, I think for me, it was a combination of things overall of everything we talked about, but also, you know, keeping in mind that you're also going to live in that place. You also need to pay for rent and expenses as there's things for you to do. And if you're coming with somebody along, are they going to fit in that space? Because you don't want to come home after a 28-hour shift and your spouse is miserable. And you know they're not able to find a job and they're not able to thrive because they're gonna need to be independent from you. You're gonna be busy. So I think that was important to me when I was finding places and be like, okay, you know, this might be the best program that it is, but you know, there's a rural program I interviewed and I love the program itself, everything I offer, but when I step back, I look at everything, the support that I was going to need to thrive as a couple, as we were recently married, and as in my personal life. And that wasn't the best fit for me. I still ranked them, but I ranked them lower. So I think it was a combination of I didn't let my personal life be completely gone when I was applying for a residency. It was like, can we pay rent? Are we going to be comfortable? Can my spouse get a job? Can we go to a restaurant and feel comfortable eating dinner, outside of residency?
That's true.
Or are we just not going to be able to do that? Things that were important to us, so I took all that into account. And then I would call her at that time after every interview. And when we were going back and forward between my first and my second choice, she's like, you were the happiest when I heard you when you talk about this program. So find somebody, your best friend, your mom, grandma, anybody that kind of remembers those things. And so we went to my top 3 list at that point, because it gets very hard at the end. You're like, oh, I want this, but I don't. Would I be happy here? So she helped me be like, look, when you call me, you were so excited about this program, and I know you love this other one, but so it kind of helped me with that. But take everything into consideration. If you're single, it's a little bit easier. But if you're single, also look at your dating life and what you envision for yourself, because are you going to be able to meet anybody from the community? Are you going to be able to date somebody? Are you going to have a social life? At some point, you also need to disconnect from residency and have a life. So those were important to me.
Thank you so much. So now I'm just going to open the floor. Ayala, if you have some questions that you would like to ask that I didn't ask, please go ahead. And then as well as our panelists, if there are other things that you think are really important, and please excuse my dog, he's getting restless. If there are any other tidbits of advice that you would like to share, by all means, please do that. And I will just sit back, and if there's a question, I may chime in, but go ahead.
Yeah, first off, I just want to say thank you so much for just making the space, I think, for all the reasons that we see on the grid. So thank you, and for your work. I like to start off always with that piece, because it is hard, and it's a hard journey. And so I'm an M3 now, and so looking forward, I tend to be a leader, and I definitely would be the type of person that would be tempted to maybe and attracted to a program that says, we'll build something with you. And I'm seeing some people's reactions. And so I'm just curious to think about, like, when you were selecting a residency program, like, what are some cautionary advice around wanting to build something with the residency program versus finding like what you think is supportive? And I guess it's important to share a little bit about myself, in the sense that I'm from San Francisco, and I have many years of work in the transgender community and HIV work. And I've come to Chicago for medical school, and have found home in creating like a two-spirit support group in the community. And that's kind of been like my sense of support and moving forward. So I'm comfortable making space, but I'm just kind of curious of envisioning, what does it look like in residency? When do I have time to make space? Do I have time to find support? Is it my responsibility to make protocols and programs, or should I just get the residency? And how do I come to terms with those kind of like tensions? Because I think everyone in this room is a leader. And so, like, how do you make peace with being honest with yourself and listening to, like, I can work with this. As an Indigenous student, I do find space in Latino spaces, and sometimes I don't. So I found spaces that I would never think of to find home in Chicago, so.
I'm going to answer that for you. I'm a leader too, and I like leadership. I was part of the AFFP to the LMSA liaison back when I was in med school. So a question that helped me is, first you need to figure out, will the program allow the space for leadership? So a good question for me will be like, how involved are your residents with organizations? Do they go to conferences? Do they do, how involved are they? And then I will bring things like, for example, if I wanted to be part of a, occupy a national level leadership, would it be a space for me to use, even if I need more than my 5 days of CME, because you represented the program and they gain a lot from that too. So, and you'll find some programs, some programs are very honest, and they're like, look, we're a very small program. There's 4 residents per year. Like, we can't afford for you to go to conferences and do sort of things. And some of the programs are like, oh, we love that. We want people to be involved. We want residents to be involved. So I felt that asking that was helpful for me. With regards to opening space, it can be a double-edged sword, in my opinion. When I was in Kansas, I also got pushed to try to do a lot of like, and it's hard when you are the only one trying to do that. Like the organization loves it, but they want to sit back and let you do all the work. So, you know, it's kind of rough if you're the only one trying it. And residency is a time for you to learn. When you don't learn residency, you're not going to learn it after. So you need to also focus on that. Intern year is definitely not the year to try to do anything. At least it wasn't on my program, and for anybody I talked to, it's just not. So you have to be patient. You know, in my first year, I didn't do any of the leadership at all. And I was used to be in leaderships and stuff, and I didn't. And I had to be patient because that was my time to be an intern. And I knew if I excel or did well as an intern, then the opportunities were going to open up in second and third year, and they did. So you kind of have to be patient, knowing, you know, not trying to do everything, because intern year is just hard. So, and it's a big learning curve for you. So I feel like you might have to put that to the side. Doesn't mean that you're never going to do it, but just put it to the side and just look for the opportunities. Like I was able to find opportunities. I'm like, oh, this will be great if we do this. I knew it wasn't the right time, because then it gives you time to, you know, solidify your medicine, do your medicine, and then just, you know, move forward.
I think one of the things that you really have to look at, I think Dr. Belmont touched on it, is the difference between saying they're interested in something and already having some semblance of a structure built out. Because remember, in interviews, you know, some of us are genuinely bringing our representative, and we're meeting the organization's representative. You know, we're not meeting them any more than they're hearing about us, but everybody has their best face forward, and nobody's going to say, hey, we're biased against the LGBTQ community. Nobody's going to say that, you know. And then if they appear and you say, hey, you know, are you willing to partner to make some changes? They're going to say, nobody's going to say no. Well, very few people are going to say no, you know. And so you just have to, again, look at what they're already doing, and they may not be doing like my residency. My attendings weren't like doing what most people would seem, you know, view as appropriate, but they were open to kind of, you know, that kind of leadership. The other thing is, like Dr. Is it Otano? I'm looking for the name. Sorry. Said, you're there to learn. And if you have the capacity, like some of my colleagues in residency, they had the capacity to do a million things and they did not stop. And, you know yourself. There were points in my residency that I had the capacity to do what I had, just what be a resident, be an intern. And so if I know myself to be that way, but I did look and collect information. So on the other side, I came out with all these programs and HIV Real Talk and blah, 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 blah. And now I'm at Howard Brown, I'm regional medical director. But during my learning time in residency, I was like, hey, this is paperwork. Because there's something odd about the business of equity is speaking truth to a lot of times to powers about themselves that they want to pretend don't exist. You know, and so do you have time to do that? Think about whether or not you do. Some people do, some people don't. Know yourself.
Yeah, I agree completely. I think every program can have the capacity and probably wants you to bring all of the things that make you to their program. It's a question of whether or not they have proven that they've supported other residents through that process. And so, yes, you may have all these great ideas, and yes, they love them, but you might end up being on your own if they've never actually supported anyone through that process before. So it's important to ask very kind of specific questions and get them to give you concrete examples of what they've done in the past. And it's also important to recognize that not everything is super rosy. And so speaking to them about how they can improve on that process in the future. Obviously building programs from the ground up, there are going to be obstacles along the way. And if they can show that they've actually learned from that process, as opposed to just dumping the excess work onto their resident, I think that can make a huge difference as well.
And one more thing I would add to that, it's, I thought that the residency and the hospital were the same thing, and they're not. So although my program was very happy and very forward, let's do this, let's do that, at the end of the day, we represent the hospital. And the hospital was very non-willing to make a lot of changes. So the frustration came, we'll have all these, like for a little intake form, we wanted to change our intake forms on the clinic, but we are an outpatient clinic that represents the hospital. So if we're gonna change that, I had to change for all the clinics. And that, it's a process that by the time I left, it was still being approved. And if we implemented it, we started it in like September of last year, and it was a form, but there was so much bureaucracy. So, and those are hard questions to ask, but you can kind of say like, have the residents been able to implement any hospital-wide policies? Because you can make changes within your residency, which is a controlled environment. Are you able to carry that out to the hospital system and involve every physician or every, that's a different story. You got to start somewhere. We started, I was happy with what we did, but I was not even able to get some forms translated for my patients that speak Spanish in Florida to take home, so because that was just a huge thing that we couldn't do. So you also have to learn to live with the frustrations and pick your battles, because at the end of the day, you still there to learn. So.
I just want to take a moment and let everyone know that it is 7 after the hour. So if any of our panelists have to leave, we completely understand. And we first just want to say thank you very much for imparting some advice and wisdom as we as students get ready to pursue this amazing profession of medicine. So if anyone needs to leave, completely understand, and we thank you for helping us build this safe space. But Ayala, if there is anything else that you would like to add, or if any of the panelists that can stay have anything that they would like to add, we welcome that now.
Thank you, Annie.
Dr. Matthews, did you have something that you wanted to add? I saw you pop up really briefly. Guess not. Okay, go ahead.
And I would just add, be you, and thank you for also you for being here. It takes a lot of courage to put your name and your face in a camera, and be you on the other side too. We need you on the other side. There's people waiting for you and willing to help you. Find mentors, even if they're not belonging in your organizations. There's places like SNMA, like LMSA, like all that we're willing to help each other. So don't be shy about reaching out when you have a struggle, when you have a problem, reach out. There's people out there that are willing to help you, and we will be waiting for you on the other side. And residency is temporary. We always remember that.
Did you have any additional questions, Ayala?
Not at this time. I just want to say thank you again for your guys' time, and yeah, those are the questions I had.
Fantastic. Well, Dr. Belmonte, Dr. Atana, thank you so much for being in this space, creating this space with us. Also want to send a special thank you to Dr. Matthews and Toward for Diversity for also having this space available to us to discuss these, I would call them difficult conversations at times. So with that, we appreciate you all. Thank you so much. And I hope that you have a fantastic remainder of your evening as well as your week.
Thanks.